Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, and welcome to your family movie night. My name is Brandy, and I'm going to be your host this evening. Before we get started, I want to remind you to take a moment to download the materials that are that have been preloaded for you. These are some tools that will help you navigate a conversation with your family, maybe get it started, and help you break down some of those barriers if they exist. Also, we have a chat, and I would love to hear what children are here, the ages. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat box telling us the ages of your children. And also you can use the chat throughout this movie and our conversation to share your thoughts. We also have Q&A. So when you have questions that you want us to answer, just go ahead and post them in the Q&A. So while you guys do that and tell us how old your kids are, I have to say I'm really excited to be here watching Screenagers next chapter with all of you. But I'm even more excited to be able to talk to Tabb after. Ali is a licensed clinical social worker and therapist, and she'll be joining us after the movie, but she's going to answer our questions. And for those of you who are wondering who we are and why we're hosting this event, let me take a step back. Intivix is our name, and IT is our game. We are what's called a managed service provider. Basically, what that means is we provide IT support and services to local businesses. Now, I could go into the details of what we do, but that's not why you're here. Well, why would an IT provider be showing a free screening of Screenagers? Great question. Glad you asked. What some of you might not be aware of, Intivix is very passionate about keeping kids safe, both virtually and physically, especially within our own communities. And this is part of a way of giving back for us. I mean, think about everything that's going on today, our environment. We're still in this semi-shelter in place, and there is so much social unrest. And that means a lot of negativity, negative news. I mean, we hear it, we read it, we see it, and these situations combined can cause stress and anxiety, and in some cases, depression. Add in social media and digital platforms to the mix, whew, we have a whole new level of stress. So our hope tonight is that this experience will open the opportunity for you and your family to begin having tech talks, important conversations about mental health, because let's face it, now is the time to begin having these conversations with our kids. So, without further ado, please enjoy our viewing of Screenagers next chapter, and don't forget to write down any questions you might have. Our live interactive Q&A with Ali starts right after the movie. Enjoy. Wow, what a powerful message. I don't know what you guys thought about it, but hopefully we'll hear from you soon. I know we have questions or maybe some thoughts to share. As you guys can see, I picked up a few participation people here. But what I'd like to do is maybe get you guys talking a little bit, answer some or put some of your questions into the Q&A or start a chat, get a conversation going. And while you start to type in your answers or questions, I'm going to take a minute to introduce you to Tabb. Ali, first of all, I want to say I am so honored to have you joining us this evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
Yay. Well, I've already told the viewers a little bit about you, who you are and what you do, but there's so much more to tell. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself, your work, and maybe how you became involved with Screenagers?
Absolutely. Like Brandy said, my name is Tabb, and everyone, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm super pumped if parents are here watching with their kids, And to the kids in the audience, I really want to encourage you right now to, if you have questions or if you have reactions or if anything stuck out to you, go ahead and put that in the chat as well, because your voices matter. And one thing that we can even practice during our discussion tonight is parents and kids talking about some of these issues. So I just wanted to put that plug out there quick. So I'm a therapist. I live in Indiana, and I know you guys are in California, so hooray for the West Coast. So I have worked with kids and from age 5 to 18 since about 2012. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and so that means I have the coolest job ever. And currently I'm in private practice in Indianapolis. So Indianapolis, Indiana. And I heard about Screenagers. Well, it came on my radar because a lot of the families that would come in, so I work with families, kids, you know, kind of all different types of arrangements. But one thing that I really noticed in the past, I would say since 2014, 2015, is parents' concern with dealing with screens and how that may or may not be impacting mental health and motivation and schoolwork behaviors and the whole gambit. And it just kept coming up and kept coming up. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is an issue that we have not had to deal with quite yet as a society, because we haven't had smartphones widely available up until the recent past. So I realized that was going to be a challenge. And I thought, well, what are some resources out there? You know, is there research on it? Do we know like how it's impacting brain development? And I found it's still a very new field. So Screenagers is really neat because they put out a film, I guess 9 years ago, that's focused specifically about screen use. And I started hosting and helping facilitate dialogues like this in person at schools and churches. And so there were events that kind of happened all across the country, which was cool. So I stayed local. I didn't travel to do that. And then when COVID-19 happened, everything had to go online. And I had been planning on helping to facilitate dialogues in the spring in person. Fortunately, the Screenagers team was able to shift to doing virtual sessions and virtual screenings. So that's kind of how I got involved, is I just saw that there was such a need for it. And I realized if I'm going to do a good job as a therapist, I have to be equipped to support families with the nuances and really be able to understand the different facets that go into screen use and their mental health. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, I see that we have some questions coming in already. And I know that this is Hayden. Sorry. This is Hayden. This is Hayden. She's 12. She's my daughter. And this is one of her best friends, Maddie. And she's also 12. So they were taking notes, and I know that they have some thoughts that they want to share and possibly maybe even some questions for you. But I see that I just wanted to go down. I believe in our Q&A, Kyle, you might have to help me out here. It looked like there was a question that came in from Deanna, and it was a really good question. I wanted to address it, but I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, so we published the question, and the question was, what are your thoughts about screen time during our current times with so many restrictions on our abilities to socialize in person?
Great question, because up until a month ago, these ladies were spending hours on end on the computer doing classwork.
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, definitely. It was.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that question was asked kind of at the beginning, because there is such a connection. I mean, we know that, and kids know that themselves. There really is a connection between screen use or technology use and connecting with friends. So it is really, really challenging because there is a global pandemic, and it's considered like a collective trauma. And so that means it's having an impact on everybody in different ways, because humans, we like to kind of know what's going on. We like to be able to predict things. And so that in and of itself is challenging. And that's something I've tried to really reinforce with the families I work with. Because if you forget that this is going on and it has an actual impact on people's well-being, then it's easy to kind of be hard on yourself, be hard on your kids, and just not really be sure kind of how to structure time. So the question is, screen time during our current times, so many restrictions on our abilities to socialize. The socialization thing is so important for adolescents. Adults, parents, we don't get it anymore because we're not in that stage of life. But for them to thrive and be like the best version of themselves, they need to be able to socialize with peers. So one of the big pieces of advice that I have given a lot of families over the past few months is recognize that this is a very unique time. And so if previously you and your family had kind of like a solid, game plan for screen use, and, we're not going to go past this time, or, it's only going to be an hour or two a day. Recognizing that we need to be, I see some laughing. I'll have to hear a story. But this is a time where we need to be able to adapt and pivot and be flexible. And so that means we as adults recognize kids are going to be on their screens a lot more. And if we're really rigid and, it's been X amount of time and, like I said, you have to get off, and they're not getting any time to socialize with friends, it's tricky. One thing that I like to throw out there, though, is make sure that you have a balance of how you are spending your time. So you will be spending more time socializing with friends online, which is cool, but be thoughtful for teenagers, be thoughtful about how you're spending your time, because if you are spending an hour and a half a day scrolling through Instagram, that's not quite the same as FaceTiming with a friend. And while it can be entertaining, and TikTok obviously makes everyone laugh because it's hilarious, but if you are not giving yourself an opportunity to engage with people your own age, and if that can't be FaceTime, maybe it could be like in a park, like social distancing in a park. But making sure that you kind of have a balance, I think, would be like the most important things. And for adults, recognizing you need to be kind of gentle on the kids right now, because everyone right now is doing the best that they can.
So you just touched on so many different points, and I'm listening to the peanut gallery here, and not in a bad way, but you said, well, because TikTok's funny. And of course my daughter's like, well, I wouldn't know because I don't allow her to have that. But one of the interesting points that it looks like Adam, his son, said, a reaction from my 13-year-old son, I don't really feel like that's like, he doesn't relate to it because him and his friends don't really care if other people aren't responding to texts. And I find that interesting. So would that be, age, just who they are, boys, girls?
So the research kind of indicates, and again, I just want to continue to remind people, our body of research in this area is so new. There's not decades, there's barely 1 decade, which is not that much as far as like gathering information. So what I have seen in my clinical practice is oftentimes young women tend to use social media more to engage in relationships, like friend relationships, relationships with peers, and young men will engage with peers, but it's usually with a video game interface. And so, there are some kind of distinctions. Obviously, there are definitely a lot of awesome young women out there that like to video game, and there are a lot of young men out there who couldn't care less about playing video games and are interested in, different social media platforms. So yeah, there kind of can be. I mean, as far as the age breakdown, new apps are developed every single day. And Common Sense Media is actually a really helpful resource. It's commonsensemedia.com. We can put that in the chat for you guys. And that has a lot of really good, if folks haven't already been familiar with it, just good recommendations kind of about that specifically, like what what do we see as working for different age groups and what's appropriate or not appropriate. And it's just so you can kind of make a more informed decision. So does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you were talking about putting something in the chat, which I think is great. The other thing that I know that we spoke about earlier, there's a lot of parents who talk about like, well, how do I, like, what's an appropriate amount of time, right? So Hayden and I have, and I know it's, you know, like it's controversial a little bit. We've had the tech talk started in 3rd grade because I wanted her to be aware. Like, here are the reasons that you actually can't have a smartphone in 3rd grade. Like, it's, you know, several reasons. But as she got older, it was inevitable, obviously. But I'm very much like, this is why you can't. And here's the thing. I want to be able to check your phone if I allow certain apps. And she has no problem with it because it's I've granted trust. Therefore, she now trusts me. So it's like this trust back and forth. However, we limit her, right? So we set on her phone, it turns off after so much time, whatever we set. But sometimes I'll turn it back on if I'm like, you know, you need to do some art or clean your room, and I allow music. I'm curious if there's any parents out there that would be interested in using the documentation I believe Jonah was talking about earlier, which tells us like, hey, here are some ideas on how you can do screen time, right? I believe he said that there's a link that we could post up.
Yeah, so there are a lot of, at this point in time, it's really cool because there are different examples of screen time contracts. And, you know, the biggest thing that I would say about that, and Brandy, it sounds like you and your daughter have been able to kind of navigate that, is that figuring out screen time use needs to be collaborative. So I mean, to the young people, you know, in the virtual room, it doesn't really feel good if an adult is like, no to this, and I'm the boss and you don't get to question me because I said so. That right. Usually feels bad. And adults, I mean, we can respect that and recognize that, because if someone, you know, in an authority position at your job came to you and said, listen, you're not allowed to do this thing and that thing because I'm the boss, we wouldn't react well. We want to help kids develop critical thinking skills. And so that means that they're going to learn to use them on us, on the adults that are in their lives. And so if you're able to kind of come up with an idea that's collaborative, you're going to have more buy-in from your kids because their voice is being heard. So Brandy, I really like how you said, this is not appropriate and here's why. Because I mean, I don't know, you know, I wasn't there for the conversation, but my experience has been when kids get the here's why, then they're able to kind of, okay, I'm connecting the dots, and my mom or dad, you know, would put these restrictions because they care about me, not because they don't want me to have fun. So when it can be more of a dialogue and it can be collaborative, that can be really beneficial. So the contracts have been posted in the chat, which is great. One thing that I would encourage parents to keep in mind, when you are having a discussion with your kids about what's appropriate, a lot of times as adults, we kind of focus on, well, but what's like the right number? You know, how many minutes should it be? And how many minutes should it not be? That's really tricky because every kid is different, and kids might be using, I mean, if they're using their phone to listen to music while they're doing art, is that really screen time? You know, like, so what I like to encourage parents to think about is asking themselves and asking their kids, what would be, and these are keywords, a healthy balance. You know, if a teenager says, I want to be able to be on my phone 10 hours a day. Okay, I believe you. How many hours are there in a day? There's 24. I did the math. And that's almost half of the entire day, not including sleep. So is that really balanced? You know, do you have other things kind of going on in your life, or is that all that you're doing? So when it gets to kind of sticky, like points about should it be this much or should it be that much, you can just kind of return to the idea of remember, we're trying to find a healthy balance. When it becomes a power struggle, everybody loses automatically. I mean, when you engage in a power struggle, I mean, no one feels good during a power struggle. Most people feel bad. So if that starts to kind of come up for you, if you're a parent or a teenager, when you're figuring out a contract, a screen time contract, then that would be a really good moment to pause. And I actually just did this with one of my clients today in session. I'm doing video sessions right now. And so the mom and son were having a disagreement about, he lost his wallet, essentially. And they were kind of getting heated and their voices were raising a little bit. And I said, hold on for a second. On the frustrated scale, from 0 to 10, where are both of you? And they were at mom was at a 6 and the son was at an 8. I said, okay, so that's above a 5. And for most people, if you're above a 5 on any feeling, you're beginning to get dysregulated. And that's kind of like what was shared in the video, if our heartbeat, depending on, your resting heart rate. But if it gets above 100 beats per minute, then the blood is not in the executive decision-making part of anyone's brain. And so we're all going to turn into cavemen because we're going to be thinking, duh, don't tell me I'm in charge. So recognize that this is a difficult conversation to have. And as adults, you need to remember, I'm supporting my kids to have critical thinking skills, to develop impulse control, and to have autonomy. And that means that they might fail sometimes. And we as adults need to learn how to be okay with that. Does that kind of help? Does that answer that question?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's because you're again, making so many great points, but the girls were taking notes and maybe you can share your diagram. So she made this diagram and I was just curious. I said, I won't read it. What are you doing? And I'll let her explain.
So I made a Venn diagram of how I could relate to the other people in the Screenagers, and I kind of had where I could relate to them and where they were feeling their own feelings and where I was feeling my feelings that didn't get mentioned in the movie.
Okay.
And it was talking about what stresses you out at the beginning of the movie. And I was thinking about overloads of schoolwork and dropping grades because then I feel like I can't get a grasp and it feels like I'm just falling from a ladder and I can't get a handhold. So it's hard. And it's a struggle to climb back up that ladder. But while I'm falling down, it's really stressful.
Yeah. So
it was stressful.
It was great because during the movie, we were able to kind of have a small dialect and talk about potential stresses. And Maddie, is there anything that you thought stood out?
For me, I could kind of relate with some of the things, just being really stressed about the current situation and just all the schoolwork we have and grades dropping and zeros and just everything that there is in the world.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I could relate to when they're talking about not interacting with people is 3 days ago I picked up guitar and I feel like it's kind of a way to do something that stimulates the brain and you can share your music with people, and I feel like that's a way to interact with people and tell people how you feel. So I really like playing guitar and
screen time to learn, but it's not just what was the one kid who was saying, I'm just on my screen and I can't step away, so I keep saying 1 minute, 1 second, 1 second. And I know that's a conversation that Hayden has had with her dad, right? Well, that was 1 second was 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's so cool that you're looking for other ways to kind of spend your time, because our brains can do so much for us, but we've got to know kind of what types of input and kind of be able to understand how it works. And so one thing that's not 100% clear, and that's why this, to the kids in the audience, this is so tricky because parents do not have, there is not, we know smoking cigarettes is not healthy. There is a lot of research behind that. It's been happening for a long time. Adults, the people who you need to look to for advice and guidance because they love you, they are entering new territory as well. And so it's tricky because parents' number one concern is taking care of their kids. And so they're kind of navigating a situation that they didn't experience. I mean, we know I didn't grow up with a smartphone. I didn't even grow up with a cell phone. I grew up with a phone with a cord on it. But so the reason, I mean, this is really tricky because we're all figuring it out. And so if we can all kind of remember that, like, we're all on the same team, you know, you're going to have arguments, absolutely, because if you're an adolescent, you want to do what you want to do because of course. And a really important skill for you to be learning now is impulse control. And we just don't totally know how screens impact things like impulse control. So parents, you know, might be a little more heavy-handed because they want to set you up to succeed. So, you know, the thing that I found to be really beneficial when navigating all of this is everyone just remembering, like, what is it that we can return to? What can we ground ourselves with? We're all on the same team. It might feel like we're not, but we really are. And so if we're getting so disconnected from each other because we're arguing and power struggling, we need to hit the reset button so that we can get connected, because otherwise it's hard to collaborate. Was someone going to say something?
No.
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 Okay. So let me see some other questions that we've got.
There's one. What are some extreme cases where the digital lives of teens have most impacted their daily lives? That's a good one.
So I think that's a really good question. And the first Screenager, because this is like the next chapter, the first Screenager is actually that's a lot of what the film is about. And I'm happy to share about some examples of that, but I also want to throw out there, that is not the majority. And so it can be it's real that screen time can get very disruptive and make people's lives, teenagers' lives, very difficult. And some of the teenagers that I've worked with have said, Allie, but this movie, like, you know, the first movie, it's just all these extreme cases, and that's going to like terrify my parents, and they're going to smash my phone. I just kind of want to put that caveat out there that, you know, percentage-wise, it's not. It can be a slippery slope, but it's not like it's not the same. The mechanism for getting hooked on technology is not exactly the same as what our brains do with like substances or alcohol. So I just kind of want to put that out there. You know, there are definitely some really scary things that have occurred. And it's important to know about those, but scaring kids straight, that's not actually effective. You know, we want kids to be aware of what is out there, but also not afraid of a boogeyman. So So some of the kids that I work with have had a lot of different challenges, and it is connected to technology. But the thing to keep in mind is underneath, so there's the overuse of technology is actually a symptom of something that's going on beneath the surface. So kids that I've worked with who have totally stopped doing all schoolwork and not see any friends and are just doing online games all the time, they aren't also like, no, I feel pretty good about myself. Yeah. Like, they also are struggling internally. So that's important to kind of remember that those two typically go hand in hand. So one young man that I worked with, his school requires, all of his schoolwork is done on a school-given iPad. And he has, at this point, failed. He's going to be a junior in high school, but he only has enough credits to be a freshman. And it's consistently because every day he gets so interested in, and now especially with the e-learning, he gets so interested in whatever's going on YouTube And it's really hard for him to develop the self-control to focus. And that kind of happened for him. It kind of happened gradually because his parents gave him smartphones and, devices when he was pretty young. So he never really developed the ability to tolerate boredom. And, who likes being bored? Nobody. It's boring. Being bored is boring. And if we, as we're kids and we're growing up, we don't learn how to deal with that uncomfortable feeling, and we think, I'm bored, I can't be bored, I need something to, distract me. That's actually, that's not helpful, because that does not promote impulse control. And kids kind of, he will say, when I start to get bored, if I can't get on a screen, he's a tall kid. And he says, I have like the equivalent of a temper tantrum. And so what we're doing a lot of work on is slowing himself down, because it's okay to be bored sometimes. Screens will always give you what you want. I mean, screens are instant gratification. And instant gratification isn't a bad thing in and of itself. But if you get so used to it when you're young, you begin to believe you can't handle not getting what you want all the time. And that's really tricky, because actually we can handle delayed gratification. If we think about all the things that humans have been through over the course of human history, we can tolerate being bored. We've dealt with a lot of things. But kids who have been, if they're always getting the stimulation that their brain wants, because screens are very stimulating, they're interesting, there's fun stuff on there, it's popping out at you, you can interact with it. But if you don't really get a break from that, then it can be tricky, because you don't learn how to develop a skill like impulse control.
Right.
So that's kind of one example. And I thought I saw another question. So that's kind of one example. Another example, and this is something that I focus on in my work. So this is not, I don't want this to be a boogeyman. But parents, if you are working with, if you're talking to your kids about screen time, one thing that's really important for you to learn how to talk about as an adult is if they see sexually explicit content. Some people refer to that as pornography. There's a lot of different definitions, but it's really tricky, because the internet has everything. The internet, I mean, the best and the worst of people can be found on the internet. And some of the young people that I work with, as humans, we're interested in bodies, like we're drawn to like sexual content, like that's, human brains are interested in that. And so if a kid accidentally, when they're, not even an adolescent, if they accidentally stumble onto something that's kind of explicit, and there's no adult there to kind of help them make sense of it, sometimes they get curious, which is normal and natural. But if there's no one there to kind of help them make sense of, this isn't really appropriate, like this is for grown-ups, this isn't really for kids to look at. I work with some kids who have almost like a compulsion with pornography. And it's really difficult, because some of them have been expelled from school because when you're an adolescent, your brain just wants to learn. And so what you put into your brain, you're going to get out. And if you are only giving your brain, one or two sources of information, your brain's going to kind of get hooked on it. That's why, we make such a big deal out of kids not using drugs or alcohol, because your brain, it's easier to get hooked on things, because your brain's just so ready to learn. So it's really tricky, because some of the kids that I work with, they really have to relearn a lot of habits, because they become really dependent on this one source of entertainment. So that's another example where kids, because it's illegal for kids to look at porn, and obviously you can't look at that at school. So some of the kids that I work with, that has been a situation. I know that that's kind of a tricky topic, and a lot of times when I bring that up, everyone's like,
Right.
which is fine. That's fine. I mean, that's real. That's real. I get it. I would not want my parents to talk to me about that. But what I'm seeing is that if we aren't able to at least find a way to broach the subject, kids aren't going to have adult support in it. And then they're going to have to deal with it on their own. And that's like a heavy burden for kids to deal with.
Well,
So that's another, example. I've got more, but I want to give time, for other comments and
yeah.
questions.
No, but that's when I was growing up, it was more about, if I don't hear it from my parents, I'm going to go ask my friends' older brothers and sisters. Well, now it's like, well, if you're not going to tell me, I'm going to just Google it, right? Google will tell me anything I want to know.
Because they're resourceful.
I think that this is a great leadway into like having those conversations now. Like,
Yeah.
when they were showing the difference between the way conversations can go. If you're defensive and you're just going to ride your kid about, getting good grades or why they were late for class versus like, hey, let's actually have this conversation because I want you to feel comfortable coming to me, not Googling it. Because when you Google, not saying, expecting Google to turn on any second now, but anyway, when you Google things, it's an adolescent and you don't have all of the information because you're not asking the right questions. And I don't want to say dangerous, right? Because like you said, it's curiosity, it's normal, but having a parent that's supportive and willing to have those uncomfortable conversations and taking a step back from how we feel versus, hey, it's inevitable. Like,
right. Like kids, yeah, exactly. And that's, one of the things that I really appreciate about the next chapter, is they discuss in there, grown-ups, you need to be doing your own work on yourself because kids are looking to you. If you're not really sure how to talk about feelings and you see that your kid is struggling, it will be to everyone's benefit for you to also invest time and energy in yourself to understand that, because then you're going to be able to better understand what your kid is experiencing. And the idea of validation.
oh,
Gosh, when parents are able to validate their kids, guys, that's like a real game changer. Because think about how good it feels, for someone to say, "Oh man, I know I was supposed to do the dishes, but I didn't because I hate doing the dishes and I'd rather do fun stuff."
right.
If I come at a kid like, well, it's your job and so you need to do it, otherwise that's being lazy, that doesn't feel good. I wouldn't respond well to that. So being able to validate, like, I get it. I don't want to do the dishes either. I want to do fun stuff. I want there to be a dish fairy. And we're a family and we gotta be a team. So how can we work this? How can we figure it out? What's going to motivate you to do your chores? It feels so different because we're able to recognize kids are doing the best they can. Everyone's doing the best they can. Mm-hmm. Sometimes their best doesn't look that great, but that's where we can kind of learn to grow together is what's going on there that you're having such a tough time. So that was just, something I wanted to throw out is for parents to kind of do their own work on themselves. And that's, learning how to talk about things that you are uncomfortable with. And for the parents that are in the audience, you can practice that with a partner or with an adult, because has anyone ever taught the grown-ups, here's how you should educate kids about internet pornography, or here's how you should educate kids about social media and body image issues? This is something we're all figuring out together, and this is not easy. This is a tough situation that we've created. There are really great things about screens and social media, very awesome things, but also no one should expect themselves to just have it figured out, because that's not how humans are too complicated for it to just be an easy fix. If it was an easy fix, we would all have fixed it by now.
Absolutely.
I want to add that, yeah. Promote what you're doing.
Yeah, we definitely don't have all the answers. You reminded me, as parents, you can hear yourself over and over again, okay? Whether it's get off the screen or put the computer away, enough video games, do the dishes, brush your teeth, anything. So at one point, as a parent, I was just feeling so depleted. Honestly, I'm just going to record myself and put it on repeat. And then maybe, at some point, but instead of doing that, we came up, well, it wasn't very much fun for her, but we did a swap day. And the entire day, I had absolutely no responsibilities other than work. I had to work. And She woke up, got herself up at 6 a.m., took a shower, made my breakfast, made my lunch, made my dinner, did all of the dishes, fed the like everything without complaining. And she was exhausted at the end of the day. And I thought, and you didn't even have to go to school or work, right? Just think about that. But then she said, well, you know, how would you feel in my shoes? I'm like, oh, dear Lord, I would never go back to middle school. No way.
Yeah.
But it's that feeling, because like there's so many different, you know, emotions, hormones, everything. But it was interesting because I asked the girls when they were talking about, like, do you always understand what you're feeling? And Maddie was like, you know what? I don't actually always understand that. And I think that's very raw and vulnerable. And I don't know, is there anything else you had to add to that, or?
Not really.
Not really. Yeah. She just like, that's a very valid point. Just, I don't understand.
Yeah, Maddie, that is so valid, because emotions are confusing. I mean, it is confusing to be a human because you've got all these different things going on. And when we haven't been given language to name different feelings, you know, most people, you know, in the film you guys saw like happy, mad, sad. You know, we know like 4 or 5, the heavy hitters, the big ones, but there's so much more than that. And if we aren't able to understand, like, oh no, you can experience multiple conflicting feelings at the same time. And if we aren't able to kind of learn how to process that, then it's going to be confusing and it's going to feel tough and be kind of a heavy burden to bear. And I don't know, that feels bad. So when parents are able to, like, yeah, it's hard to have feelings. I remember feeling so wild and weird when I was in middle school. Like, what a wild experience to have. That feels kind of good, because then, I mean, your parents maybe don't get exactly what you're going through because they're not you and they can't, but they can relate to feeling overwhelmed or feeling stressed out. And, you know, kids also don't have as much control in their lives as adults do. So, you know, wanting more autonomy, you know, we can, when we give ourselves a second to slow down as grownups and put ourselves in kids' shoes, it's a lot easier to connect.
Absolutely. I think we're approaching kind of close to the end. I didn't know if you maybe had it in you for like another question, or if maybe.
Yeah, we could maybe do like one more, and then I want to make sure, because I know, Randy, you had a few things you wanted to share with folks before we hop off.
Yeah, I will take it like 30 seconds, and it's just a couple of links. Did you have any other questions?
I was wondering how people cope with depression and anxiety, like with those types of problems.
Yeah.
You mean like your age or in general?
In general, around like kids' age, I guess.
Okay, kids.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I want to start by saying that's a really big question. And adults dedicate their entire lives to figuring out how to help with that. So I just want to throw that out there. So it's not a simple answer. If you are I'm just going to say, if you're a young person, if you're a minor and you're feeling a lot of anxiety and it's kind of like interrupting your life and your well-being, and the same goes for depression, one of the best things that people can do is not deal with it by themselves. And that means getting support, which means talking about it, at least so that other people are kind of clued in that you got some stuff that's kind of overwhelming for you. So that's kind of step one. And being able to say to yourself, you know, the way I'm feeling is not ideal, and maybe I need support to make it through this. It's difficult because if you're going to work on anxiety or depression, you have to be willing to try new things and be flexible and open to ideas from other people. Because if you could figure out your own way to get out of anxiety, you probably would have already. So some of the things that people do if they're working on those, you know, obviously people come to therapy. I do a lot of different things with kids around depression and anxiety, as far as learning how to cope with uncomfortable feelings, learning how to express how they're feeling, but not, kind of get out of control about it, learning how to regulate their emotions. So one thing that we could do, because they're coping, I could tell you a 10 bajillion coping strategies, but also in the handout section, there is a PDF that talks about emotional well-being. And I'm almost positive that there are some examples of how people are coping with issues with mental health. So that could be something cool to look at. Another thing that I would say about that is maybe that's some research that like you could do with a grown-up that you feel safe with and comfortable with, like how do people handle stuff like this? And maybe that's because like you've experienced it. Maybe it's because someone you care about is experiencing it. But when we can kind of collaborate with other people that we feel safe with and that we trust to learn together, we're going to be empowered, because then you're not dealing with it by yourself. So I know that's not like a super tangible answer, but that's the best one that I can give right now, because it is such a good, big question.
It is. Does that help? I
Yeah.
mean, to address your
Yeah,
question. Great. I don't know if we have any others that might be quick.
Well, while we look, Maddie and Hayden,
Yeah.
thank you guys for participating. Gosh. And to any of the kids in the audience, I'm so glad that your parents are making you watch this. But if you guys are still here, I'm really glad and appreciative that you are exposing yourself to some of these ideas, because it is hard to be a person. If you have an expectation that you should just have it figured out and it should be easy, that's going to make things a lot more difficult. And when we recognize, oh, there are resources and I can learn different ways to communicate and I can understand myself better, it's really empowering, and you end up feeling a lot better too. So I'm just glad that you guys were all here. I love, the time always flies. So I know that we should be wrapping up.
Yeah, there is,
in the audience.
There is one, and if I know it's not going to be a quick just answer, but it kind of is a great question after what Hayden asked, and it said, if you know your child is showing all the symptoms of depression, but they are in total denial and refuse therapy, what are some of the other options I have?
That is a hard situation to be in. That is real. So I'm going to answer that in a sideways manner. For you as the parent, are you able to be curious with your child why they are so fervently denying that there's a problem? Are you able to have a discussion with them where you are listening to their voice, so that it's a conversation and not almost like a lecture? Because kids that I've worked with who initially do not want to be in therapy, my job, like when I have a kid on the couch who's like, I don't want to be here. If I'm like, well, you need to be here, so get over it, that's not going to help anyone. That's going to feel bad. So when I'm able to kind of connect with them, like, well, dang, that's frustrating. What do you think we need to do so you don't have to be here? Well, I don't know. My mom says I need to be happier. Okay, well, what does that mean? Do you feel like you are happy? Like, tell me about your life. What's going on? When I don't have to have as much of an agenda where something's wrong and I need to prove it to you, as much as how is your life? Are there not any problems? Because if your kid is deeply depressed, there are consequences. Maybe it's related to friends, school, chores, interacting with people. Maybe if they're sleeping all the time, they're not getting outside.
Right.
And you can make observations as a parent. Like a lot of kids, irritability, depression manifests as irritability. And dang, you've been pretty irritable. Very irritable. You kind of yell at me a lot. And I'm just concerned about that because I love you and I want you to not have all these challenges. And then you can ask your kid, can you understand why I would perceive your behavior as maybe you're experiencing depression? So when you ask for them to put themselves in your shoes, if you were a parent and your kid was doing this, and this, what would you try to do? Or would you just not do anything? Most kids, a lot of the time, will say, I get it. I would probably be concerned. And then you guys are connected and you're no longer, but you're like connecting. There is not a magic cure though. You know, if a person is in denial about depression, you will not be able to argue them into submission. We do not work with that. So I would say maybe you as a parent would reach out to a therapist who works with adolescents, and you start working with the therapist. And the therapist can kind of help you think about some different ways to parent so that you can support your kid even if they don't want to do therapy. That's something that I do with parents where, you know, they're not clients in the sense where we give them a diagnosis and everything. But I'm able to kind of support them with things that their kids are going through and what are tweaks that they can make, because we cannot control other people. We can only control ourselves.
That's great.
So that's an answer that's not I know it's not a satisfying answer, but that would be a response to that question.
No, that's great. And oh my gosh, it was a great question to ask. But I know that we are now out of time. What? No, honey, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
Well, I was going to say this to the kids out there who are dealing with like difficulties and stuff with depression and anxiety, and they don't think a therapist is the answer. Well, I used to have problems with my life when I was younger, and it was not depression, it was just confusion, and I saw a therapist and it made things better. So if you don't think it's right, it might be, because it actually does help even if you don't think it will.
Wow. That was really honest. Thank you, Hayden. Yeah, that's very, I like that. So, all right. Well, Ali, again, I think, we're at a wrap. We've kept you for so long, but thank you so much for staying with us and answering questions. And to the Screenagers team, you guys all did so phenomenal. And I would love to put a special thank you out there for Kyle and Sean, who are helping behind the scenes as well. But overall, to the audience, to the viewers, we really hope that you've enjoyed this experience. And just remember before you log off to download the handouts if you haven't already done so. And if you have questions that haven't been answered or that maybe you think of later, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Kyle has put a bunch of links in the chat for you. So you can email us at success@intivix.com. You can also check out our blog site. We do, Keeping Kids Safe is a kind of a program we've started. And in that we do articles and outreach and learning more about children's behaviors and styles. And we never tell you what's right or wrong, just your child is unique and therefore requires, a unique approach. So we try to just give you all of the information so you can make the best decisions possible for your family. And also, if you want to stay connected, aside from the social media links that are in there, you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. And we will be doing more events like this. So if you want to stay up to date, you can sign up for monthly newsletters or just for events or tips and tricks if you're more technically inclined. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I really appreciate everyone, and good night. Enjoy your family.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Good night.